To keep up with our most recent articles, remember to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment with your ideas. After David went, the home felt empty and reverberated with the silence he had left behind. The first shockwave had subsided after 6 months, but the vibrations still occasionally shook me, particularly in this large old house we had purchased together, which was filled with his plans, projects, and spirit. The upstairs extra room was one of those initiatives. Prior to becoming the room where things went to be forgotten, it was intended to be his office. Later, it was going to be a nursery, but that never materialized. Scratches and the ghosts of long-gone photographs were visible on the walls, which were a dismal beige color that had become yellow with time. I concluded that it needed color, vitality, and a fresh start. Perhaps I did too. I chose a bright, hopeful blue, like the last few minutes of a summer sky. The simple part was purchasing the paint, rollers, and tape. The Kens stood in a line against the wall like mute judges, staring at the empty, depressing chamber. That seemed unbeatable. My friends all had busy lives of their own, and my daughter Anna lived hours away. On a weekly chat with my cousin Diane, I brought up my painting project. She proposed right away that her husband, Mark, could assist. "Laura, he's really good at that stuff," she had demanded. "He really likes it. He recently completed the renovation of our kitchen, essentially rebuilding it from scratch." I paused. Mark? I liked Mark enough. He was a good man, quiet, and reliable. Maybe twice a year, primarily on holidays, we saw them. Small conversation about work, the weather, and pleasantries. He was Diane's spouse, a constant presence in the background of family get-togethers, and he was frequently seen drinking beer and chatting with the other men. It seemed strange to think of being alone with him in my private house for an entire day, perhaps two. It was almost intrusive, but Diane insisted, and to be honest, the idea of dealing with that space alone myself was daunting. All right, I gave up at last. He doesn't mind if he's certain. The following evening, Mark gave a call. His voice sounded courteous, almost official, and deeper than I remembered. "Diane mentioned that you required a hand painting. That's quite generous of you to provide, Mark, but don't feel pressured, please." No, glad to assist. Avoids issues for me." He gave a small laugh. "How's your Saturday going?" "My availability is mid-morning." And so Saturday came, bringing with it an unexpected surge of nervousness. Before deciding on old jeans and a paint-splattered t-shirt I'd owned since college, I changed my clothes 3 times, poured coffee I wasn't sure he'd drink, and meticulously cleaned the house. What on earth were we going to spend hours discussing? At exactly 10, the doorbell rang. Mark was standing on the porch with a toolbox that appeared to contain the universe's secrets and a canvas drop cloth. Instead of his typical holiday polo shirt, he was sporting a worn blue work shirt with the sleeves pushed up to show off his powerful forearms, which were lightly powdered with sawdust. Outside of family dinners, he appeared different, stronger and more competent. He said, "Good morning, Laura." His warm, sincere grin helped to allay some of my fears. "Has a coffee-like scent?" "Yes, it is." I return the smile and move aside. "Enter now." "The patient is upstairs." I escorted him to the empty room. With his hands on his hips, he calmly observed it for a moment. "Large enough room. This blue will look fantastic. A lot of light." He remained silent about the emptiness and the melancholy that persisted in the walls. He simply concentrated on his work. For the first hour, we prepared the space in pleasant, comfortable stillness. I had never used a putty knife before, but he showed me how to tape the edges with painter's accuracy. He arranged the drop cloths with a skill that befitted extensive training. He exuded a serene competence that was somehow soothing. As I relaxed, I saw that my nervousness was dissipating like the mist of morning outside. He avoided interrogating David or making unpleasant inquiries. He simply worked steadily and intently. At last, he opened the first blue paint can and removed the lid. He handed me a roller and said, "I'm ready to make a mess right now." It was quite satisfying to see the first splash of bright blue against the worn-out beige. It seemed like a reclaiming of space, an act of rebellion. Mark's motions were sure and economical, and his rhythm was simple. The silence wasn't awkward, but he didn't talk aimlessly. It was a working stillness broken by the soft instruction, the clink of a paint can, or the rhythmic swish of rollers. He would whisper, "A little less pressure around the edges, or make sure you feather that out." At times, I caught myself observing his hands. Once or again, he directed my roller stroke with capable hands that were soft despite their work-related callousness. His motions had an unanticipated elegance. I proposed taking a lunch break at around noon. I had prepared iced tea and basic sandwiches. The smell of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass filled the air as we sat on the back porch. I feared the uncomfortable would never come. Instead, we had a casual conversation about residences and the pleasures and annoyances of owning older homes, not specifically about David. I laughed when he described the agony of discovering concealed plumbing problems in their kitchen renovation, accurately emulating Diane's irate sighs. As soon as I told him about my bathroom's leaking faucet, which I had been planning to replace for a while, he gave me helpful suggestions and drew a diagram on a napkin. Recalling that Anna was a student of environmental science, he inquired about her. He asked insightful questions about her studies and appeared genuinely interested. I discovered that aside from their names and ages, I didn't really know much about his children. A warmth crept into his voice as he talked about them with quiet pride. Beneath his restrained facade, there was a kindness about him that I had not before observed. The talk continued to flow like a flowing river as we returned to painting. While discussing the differences between Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters, we found a mutual appreciation for vintage blues music. With an embarrassed smile on his face, he talked about his high school band, something Diane had never brought up, and their one and only terrible performance. I talked about things I hadn't considered, much less discussed, in years, including my own long-abandoned goal of starting a tiny bookstore cafe. He nodded and asked questions that demonstrated he was paying attention to what I had to say. Even though we had just been essentially strangers for a few hours, it felt good and effortless, like speaking with an old friend. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light as the afternoon sun shone through the window. The cheery color was filling the room as it changed. It was hopeful and lighter. Mark was using a tiny brush to gently cut in the margins of the glass. The silver strands in his hair and the creases around his eyes were reflected by the sun. He noticed me observing him when he looked up. I hurriedly glanced back at the wall I was painting as I flushed, suddenly realizing how intimate the scenario was. Only the two of us, isolated from the outside world, working together on this project, these silent discoveries. He simply nodded, barely perceptibly, and returned to his painstaking task without saying anything. However, something had changed. A faint consciousness had crept into the space, a faint murmur beneath the surface of our casual friendship. Not that it was uncomfortable. It was simply there, an acknowledgement of our common humanity, maybe a bond created over silent chatter and paint fumes. We finished the first coat as the late afternoon light started to fade. The space appeared stunning, lively, and alive. A feeling of mutual success washed over us as we stood side by side, looking over our work. He answered, "Not bad," in a quieter tone. "Not awful at all." "Wonderful," I said, referring to more than simply the paint mark. "Thank you. I was not able to complete this on my own." He glanced at me, then at me with a direct, contemplative expression. "Laura, everyone needs a helping hand sometimes. From the beginning, the second day felt different. The familiar pattern we had developed had taken the place of the first unfamiliarity. Remembering that I had a black coffee, Mark brought pastries and coffee. The plan didn't need to be discussed. We simply threw ourselves into it, laying down new linens and tape off for the trim. Naturally and effortlessly, the conversation resumed where it had left off. The color was becoming more intense and silky as we applied the second coat of blue. Mark was carefully painting the strip above the window frame while perched on a small stepladder. We were discussing travel and locations we had dreamed of seeing while I worked on the wall across from me. I mentioned my desire to see the rocky cliffs and lighthouses along the Maine coast. Mark paused his brushstroke and remarked, "I went there once with my dad right after high school." His passion was sailing. His father had died many years before, and he hardly spoke about him. According to Diane, it was a challenging relationship. Was the trip enjoyable? Gently, I inquired. He looked out the window and saw something far away, but he was silent for a while. At last, he added in a quiet voice, "It was complicated." Although he wasn't cruel, my dad was a strict and demanding man who had high expectations. For the first time, I thought he might have seen me on that trip. Not only his son, but me as well. He faced me as he turned around. His expression had a sensitivity that left me speechless. Together, we were repairing a sail. He began discussing his own father, saying things he had never expressed before, and expressing regrets after it had ripped in a tempest. He cleared his throat and stopped. Even though it was only a brief moment, it altered our relationship. I was at a loss for words. I simply nodded while maintaining eye contact in an attempt to show comprehension. Unspoken emotion permeated the air in the room. My father and I had a loving yet aloof relationship. We had never experienced such a breakthrough together. Mark must have been longing for connection, and I felt a twinge of sympathy for him. I made the decision to divulge something just as intimate. "My mother," I said, a little shakily. She gathered teacups, small, fragile objects. After Grandma passed away, I discovered a secret box full of letters she had written to me but never sent, expressing her hopes and anxieties for me as well as things she was unable to express in person. Mark gently placed his brush on the paint tray's edge after descending from the stepladder. He read them and listened carefully while leaning against the wall close to me. I went on. Seeing the woman behind the mother was like meeting her again. Slowly, he nodded. "You know, it's weird how even those closest to us can occasionally feel alienated." For a considerable amount of time, we stood in silence, which was not awkward but rather full of a deep understanding. With an unanticipated intimacy, the distance between us appeared to close. It wasn't sexual or romantic. It was more profound and basic, a bond formed through mutual vulnerability, the silent acceptance of life's intricacies, and the innermost depths of those we believed to be our acquaintances. Instead of touching me, he extended his hand to point to the wall I had been painting. With a faint smile that broke the focus, he murmured quietly, "You missed a spot." When I looked, I saw that a small beige area was visible through the blue. I let out a sigh of relief by laughing. "I suppose I became sidetracked." "Happens," he answered, resuming his brush. However, the moment persisted. Each of us had given the other a peek beyond the curtain, a shared confidence. It hung in the air, glimmering in the sunlight like dust particles, altering the room's ambience and our relationship into something more subdued, profound, and surprisingly poignant. The previous fervor subsided into a cozy companionship as we completed the trim in a comfortable silence. The emotional high had subsided, leaving a feeling of intimacy and shared experience of overcoming a major obstacle. After the big event, cleaning up felt like a peaceful way to relax. As we cleaned brushes in the downstairs utility sink, sealed paint cans, and rolled up drop cloths, we collaborated flawlessly. Now there was more light-hearted banter about who painted better and simulated discussions over how to clean rollers. However, the resonance of that shared moment of vulnerability persisted beneath the lightness. Mark carefully packed his tools, cleaning each one before putting it in the sturdy toolbox. As I collected the empty donut box and coffee cups, I felt as like I was standing inside a promise as I stood in the freshly painted room, surrounded by the gentle warmth of the evening sun coming through the spotless windows. The blue was deep, serene, gorgeous, and brimming with potential. The room was not merely painted. It seemed like a place that had been reclaimed, not just from neglect, but also from melancholy. I remarked, sincerely appreciative. "It looks amazing, Mark." "It doesn't seem like enough to say thank you." His toolbox clicked silently shut. "Laura, it was my joy. It was lovely, really." He glanced back at me after glancing around the room. "It feels hopeful and is a nice hue." That word was hopeful. He was instrumental in restoring hope to this house, to this room, and perhaps to myself. We went to the front door and stood there. The awkwardness I had feared at first seemed like a faraway memory. It was replaced by a calm respect, a genuine and earned friendliness. "Diane will be overjoyed that we avoided killing one another." I made a joke. His laugh was smooth and rich. "No, we work well together." His hand was on the doorknob as he paused. "Listen to what was said earlier, Laura. I appreciate you listening, you know." I said quietly, "Thank you too, Mark, for sharing." We paused for a moment, exchanged glances, acknowledged the surprising depth we had discovered in one another, and made a silent commitment to respect that barrier and the foundation of our friendship and family-based relationship. The process of painting a space sparked a connection that I hadn't expected, but it felt important. His truck pulled away from the curb, and he gave one more nod and a slight smile before disappearing. The smell of fresh paint filled the hallway as I leaned against the door after closing it. The house no longer felt so deserted. There was no echo in the silence. It was serene. I hadn't anticipated the experience. No dramatic, amazing incident occurred, as is often the case with fantastic accounts. There was nothing scandalous or illegal about the astonishing section. It was about the unexpectedness of developing such a strong, sincere, and completely respected emotional bond with a person I hardly knew, just my cousin's spouse. It was about realizing that in the quiet moments of a shared activity, vulnerability could be freely expressed and understanding might grow. It was about seeing someone and maybe seeing myself in a fresh and surprising way. I went back upstairs and stood at the blue room's doorway. Now it seemed like mine, a place where the quiet power of rebirth, the unexpected gift of connection, and the subtle, unexpected ways life could bloom when you only open the door and invite someone in to help you paint were what defined it rather than loss. It served as a reminder that deep bonds based on respect for one another and the quiet bravery to show vulnerability may form in the most unlikely situations. At times, that is the most